You don't notice the silence at first, not when you're young. You think it's normal how your father never speaks unless something breaks, or how your mother only ever smiles for other people. You learn to live between the pauses in their sentences, the loaded glances across dinner, the way they tighten their lips when you speak too loud, cry too long, or... I grow up in a house that always looks immaculate. You could eat off the floors, but they say your childhood shapes your idea of home. Well, my idea of home is walking on eggshells barefoot, learning how to read moods faster than books, and understanding very early that love can be something rationed. I don't know I'm starving until I have Jonah. My son is born on a cold morning in March, and something inside me finally thaws. He's pink and furious, full of need and noise, and for the first time, I understand what it feels like to want to give everything away, every breath, every heartbeat, just to see someone smile. For a while, it's just the two of us. I raised Jonah in a tiny duplex near the river, walls paper-thin and floors that groan like old knees. I work nights at the clinic, sleep when he naps, and spend the rest of the time filling our space with music, with messy crafts, with warmth. Our life is small, but it's ours, and most importantly, it's honest. My parents live exactly 28 minutes away but might as well exist in another country. They come around on birthdays with the kind of gifts that make you feel poor. Books Jonah can't read yet, suits he'll grow out of in weeks, toys too fragile to be played with. They never stay long. My mother once told me while slicing strawberries into perfect halves that I always had a flair for the dramatic. My father didn't correct her, he never does. I don't leave Jonah with them, not for long. A few hours here and there. I always pack snacks, label everything, give them instructions that they ignore. "We raised you just fine," my mother says every time. "No, you didn't, you raised me quietly." The storm comes without warning. Not a real storm, though that would have been easier. Just a landlord with greedy eyes and a letter stapled to my door. The building's being sold, renovated, upgraded. Tenants like me aren't part of the plan. I have 30 days. My stomach knots before my brain catches up. I look at Jonah sleeping on the couch, his mouth open slightly, one sock half off, and I panic. I call shelters, apply for housing lists, talk to churches and community aid centers. I find a place, but it won't be ready for 3 weeks. Insurance covers a cheap motel, but I don't want Jonah living around cigarette burns and thin walls that scream through the night. I call my mother as a last resort. There's a long pause after I ask. Just for a week, I say, maybe 10 days. She sighs like she's agreeing to dog sit, not to house her grandson. "I suppose we could," she says, "as long as he behaves." My father doesn't even come to the phone. I drop Jonah off with a grocery bag packed full, his favorite snacks, organic soup cups, fruit leathers, the kind of things that say I'm trying even when the budget says otherwise. I include a printed list of his food sensitivities and daily routines. I hug him twice. He clings to me longer than usual. "I'll see you soon, baby," I whisper, brushing the hair out of his eyes. "You're safe." I tell myself that. Over and over. That night I sleep with my phone on my chest. The motel smells like bleach and regret. On the third day, Jonah's voice on the phone sounds. Small, not just tired, distant. I ask what he's eaten. He pauses. "Nothing today." My stomach drops. "What do you mean nothing?" "I had some toast yesterday and crackers, but Nana said lunch is only for real family." I don't remember driving, I just remember arriving. The sky is low and gray, the kind of weather that makes you feel like the whole world is holding its breath. I knock on the door harder than I need to. My father opens it, looks at me like I'm interrupting something important. The house smells like bacon and baked apples. Jonah sits at the breakfast bar with a glass of water, no plate, no fork. His shoulders are slumped, his eyes far away. I kneel beside him. Did you eat? He shakes his head. My mother appears, all satin and sharp perfume. He said he wasn't hungry. No, I didn't, Jonah whispers. My father shrugs. He's a picky eater. We're not gonna waste food. It's not the words that hit me, it's the tone, casual. Like this isn't abuse. Like this isn't cruelty dressed in breakfast. I don't scream. I don't cry. I gather Jonah in my arms, tell him softly, we're going. My mother huffs, you're making a scene. I'm ending one, I say. Jonah doesn't even ask where we're going. That scares me more than anything. At the diner, he picks at pancakes. I ask if something's wrong. My tummy's too tight, he says. I think my hunger got stuck. That's when I cry. Right there next to a jukebox that hasn't worked since the 90s. I realize it's not just food they denied him. It's belonging. That night I sit alone in the motel and make a list, not groceries, not housing leads. A list of things I've let slide. How my father only hugged me at graduations. How my mother taught me to hide bruises not on skin but on pride. How they acted like Jonah was an inconvenience, a reminder, a mirror. And how I kept swallowing that for the sake of peace. This is only the beginning. A seemingly perfect family hiding fractures so deep they echo through generations. You think you know them until the silence is broken. Don't miss what comes next. The secrets, the reckoning, the fire behind the smiles. Watch next to enter the darkness they've buried for years and uncover the answer. Can love truly heal every wound, or does it just expose the ones that never closed? Subscribe now so you don't miss a moment of this journey. And leave a comment below. Do you believe this family can recover, or is the damage already done? We'd love to hear your thoughts. The morning after I take Jonah back, I wake up with the taste of metal in my mouth. Guilt, maybe, or grief. I lie still in bed, watching the shadows crawl across the ceiling like slow-moving regrets. Jonah is in the next room, breathing softly, clutching his blanket like it's a shield. And for a second, just one, I wonder if I did the right thing, not taking him back. That part's not in question, but all the years before it. All the holidays I brought him there for the sake of tradition. All the phone calls I forced him to make on birthdays. The polite smiles I taught him to wear around people who made me feel small. Did I teach him to doubt his own instincts, just like I was taught? Because I had them too. The instincts, the gut whispers, the tightening in my chest when my father made those offhand comments. When my mother looked right through me like I wasn't worth seeing, I just didn't listen, not until now. And that realization hits me harder than any insult they ever threw my way. I taught my son not to trust his gut. I did that. Not them, me. I want to believe I was doing my best. But maybe my best wasn't enough. That's what keeps me up at night now, not the fear that they'll come back into our lives. But the fear that I handed them the door and smiled while they walked through it. I get up, make coffee, stand in the kitchen barefoot while the world wakes up. It's strange how quiet things get after a rupture. Like the silence is daring you to fill it with something meaningful this time. Jonah doesn't talk about what happened, not directly. He's not withdrawn exactly, just watchful, cautious. He watches me when I cook like he's checking that I remember how. He asks twice before grabbing snacks. He apologizes for things that don't need apologizing, like breathing too loud or leaving his socks in the living room. He never used to do that. I try to reassure him, tell him he's safe, that he's home, that he didn't do anything wrong. But kids know when adults are lying, even the nice lies, especially the nice ones. And sometimes I catch myself doing what my mother did, smiling when I want to scream, softening truths that should stay sharp. It's a reflex, this performance of calm, one I learned too well. I don't tell many people what happened. Not at first, because part of me still doubts it counts as real harm. No bruises, no police reports, just hunger, dismissal. Words spoken in cold tones over warm breakfast plates. But then I remember how Jonah looked. Small, folded in, like someone had tried to erase him and almost succeeded. So I start small. I call my Aunt Rosie. We haven't been close in years. But she always had a kind heart until my parents edged her out for being too emotional. She listens, doesn't interrupt, and when I finish, she says, "Oh, honey, I knew something was wrong, I just didn't know what." She doesn't try to explain it away, doesn't say they were raised different or they didn't mean it. She just believes me, and that alone makes me feel like maybe I'm not crazy. One by one, I start sharing the story, not for revenge, for clarity, for truth. For the people who always asked why Jonah and I seemed distant from the rest of the family. For the ones who believed the curated holiday photos. For the ones like me who were told to smile and be grateful even when their hearts were caving in. Some believe me right away, others pause, say nothing. You can hear the mental math trying to figure out if they have to choose sides, if silence is easier than discomfort. But I've been silent too long, and silence is where the rot grows. My mother calls 3 days later. I don't pick up. Her voicemail is strained and sweet and full of pretense. "I'm sorry if Jonah misunderstood something. I think there's been a little mix-up. Maybe we can talk and clear the air." Clear the air. Like this is some sitcom misunderstanding. Like starving a child is just a funny anecdote at brunch. Then my father leaves a message. His tone is sharper. "You're really making this a bigger deal than it needs to be. People are talking. You're blowing up the family over crackers. That's what this is about." "No, Dad, this is about dignity, about a child's worth." But of course, he doesn't get it. They never do. The worst part, some days I still miss them, not the people they are. But the people I imagined they could be. That's the real tragedy in families like ours. It's not the damage done. It's the love you keep offering, hoping this time they'll choose not to crush it. The small part of you that still believes maybe, just maybe, they'll finally see you and say, "I'm sorry, you were right to walk away." But they don't. They send guilt, voicemails soaked in it, thinly veiled barbs wrapped in concern. And yet I play them, I listen, I hurt, I question, because abuse doesn't always look like yelling. Sometimes it looks like your phone lighting up with a name you used to associate with safety. Sometimes it's just the sound of your own heartbeat speeding up when you hear your mother's voice saying, "Why are you doing this to us?" When what she really means is, "Why aren't you protecting us from the consequences of our actions?" One night, Jonah draws a picture. It's a house, with stick figures in front of it, 2 small ones holding hands, one taller figure off to the side with no face, another one with excess over the eyes. I ask him what it is. "That's our old house," he says, "and me and you and them." I nod. "And what are they doing?" "Watching," he says, "but not coming close." I ask if that's what he wants. He nods again. I tape the picture to the fridge as a reminder. We don't go back for the people who let us starve. It's not just the phone calls that change. It's the invitations. The group texts dry up. The family email thread, once full of baby photos, dinner plans, prayer chains, goes silent. Aunt Margie, who never missed a Sunday roast, suddenly has a lot going on. Cousin Theo needs space. People start pulling away from my parents like the tide leaving behind everything it no longer needs. And they notice. Oh, they notice. My mother calls again, voice more brittle this time, as if she's holding herself together with duct tape and fake laughter. I think you've made your point, she says. People are acting strange. I don't respond. Because no, I haven't made my point. Not yet. They're used to keeping things contained, polished. They know how to dress pain up in a nice blouse and serve it with coffee and shortbread, but I've stopped playing that game. I've started opening windows, telling the truth with no garnish, no apology. And when sunlight hits rot, it smells. One by one, people begin to smell it. Melissa, my sister, calls for the first time in 6 months. I didn't know, she says, voice low. I want to scream. Of course you didn't. You were too busy being the daughter they adored, the one who never asked why, who never said no, but I don't scream, I stay calm. I'm not mad at you, I say, but I'm not keeping quiet anymore. She sighs, they're really shaken. They should be. For a second, I almost expect her to defend them, but she doesn't. Instead, she says, I canceled the kids' sleepover next weekend. That small act, tiny but seismic, feels like someone placing a stone on my side of the scale. For once. Because silence doesn't just protect the guilty. It isolates the honest. And every time someone believes me, I feel less alone. I start talking more. To friends who always wondered why Jonah didn't talk about his grandparents. To neighbors who thought my parents were the ideal suburban couple. To Mrs. Avery, my old high school counselor, who once asked me why I always looked tired but never followed up. I don't embellish. I don't dramatize. I just tell them what happened. They didn't feed my son. They told him he wasn't part of the family. They made a 7-year-old boy feel like a burden, and every time I say it out loud, it becomes more real and harder to deny. It's amazing how many people confess things after that. I always felt something was off with your mom. Your dad never looked at Jonah like a grandpa should. I thought it was just how they were raised. I hear that one the most. Just how they were raised. As if cruelty were a family recipe passed down in generations, and you're not allowed to question it because it's just how things were done. But I wasn't raised to starve children of love. I wasn't raised to confuse image with worth. I wasn't raised to be silent. I was trained, and I'm unlearning it every single day. I don't go back to that house, not even to drive by, but I hear about it. Melissa says my dad walks around aimlessly now, lawn half dead, slippers on even in the yard. My mom keeps baking, keeps hosting or trying to, but fewer people come. Her circle is shrinking. People avoid eye contact when she mentions Jonah. Some say nothing at all. Reputation used to be her shield. Now it's just a mirror. And what she sees in it, she can't fix with lipstick and banana bread. I'd be lying if I said I didn't feel a flicker of satisfaction. But that's not why I did any of this. I didn't do it to punish them. I did it because Jonah needs to know that silence isn't safety. And I need to know that truth still matters even when it's inconvenient. Even when it hurts. Especially when it hurts. Because if I don't fight for my son, then I'm just repeating their mistake, and I refuse. One night, I find Jonah coloring on the floor. He's drawing our house, our real one, not the old place with the roses and shutters. Ours, the duplex, the cramped apartment above the thrift store, the new rental we just moved into. This one's small, still smells like paint, and the fridge hums too loud, but it's clean. Ours, He colors in the windows with yellow. "That's the lights," he says, "because it's warm inside." That one line shatters something in me. He's starting to trust again, to feel safe. And maybe that's the point. Maybe justice isn't always dramatic. Maybe it's a slow rebuild, a meal shared, a conversation not interrupted, a child sleeping without fear. But not everyone's ready to let go. A week later, a box shows up at my door. No return address. Inside are old family photos. Me as a baby, Melissa holding me, my mother smiling like she means it. My father's arm awkward around my shoulders. No note, no explanation, just a reminder, a tug on the guilt string they assume still works. I almost throw it away, but instead I show it to Jonah. He looks through the pictures silently. Then points to one. "Is that me?" "No," I say, "that's me." "You look sad." I smile, but it's the kind that aches. I was learning. He nods, then places the photo face down. "Can we take new ones?" "Yeah, baby, we can." Sometimes healing looks like that. Turning the page, taking a new photo. Setting fire to the story you were handed so you can finally write your own. This family used to be held together by secrets. Now we're held together by choice. But the past doesn't fade quietly, because this isn't just about one boy, one mother, or one broken house. It's about what happens when you stop feeding the lie and start feeding the truth. Subscribe so you don't miss what comes next. And tell me in the comments, have you ever had to burn the bridge to save yourself? I'm listening. It starts with a letter. No envelope. Just a folded piece of paper tucked under my windshield wiper, flapping in the morning wind like it wants to be read but doesn't want to be touched. I stand there for a full minute before picking it up. My fingers hesitate at the crease. I already know who it's from, and a part of me wants to pretend I never saw it. Like if I walk away, the past won't keep finding new ways to reach me, but I open it anyway. The handwriting is unmistakable, my mother S. Slanted, tidy, and dramatic. Always too perfect, like she was afraid of making a mistake even on paper. "You've said enough. This is cruel. Jonah's too young to be turned against us." "What kind of example are you setting?" I read it again, slower. The words don't change, but they still manage to twist tighter the second time around. Not an apology, not an ounce of reflection, just blame. As if truth itself were an act of betrayal. As if I invented the facts, painted this whole picture out of spite instead of survival. My chest burns with a familiar guilt, the kind they trained into me for decades. It curls around my ribs like a vine. I crumple the letter and throw it in the passenger seat, but I already know it'll stay with me, clinging like the smell of something rotting just below the surface. I drive home with both hands clenched on the wheel. Everything feels louder than usual. The engine, the radio static, my own heartbeat. At the kitchen table, I stare at nothing for too long. The light outside shifts. The day moves forward, but my mind stays stuck in one question. Did I go too far? I hate that I even ask myself that. I hate how deeply their manipulation still lives inside me, how it whispers in my own voice. The guilt is always there, waiting like a fog at the edge of my mind, ready to roll in and make everything blurry again. Jonah walks into the room and breaks the spell. He's got his favorite blanket over his shoulders and sleep in his eyes. "Can I have cereal?" I nod and force a smile, trying to keep the storm inside me from reaching him. "Of course, baby, whatever you want." He chooses the blue bowl. He always chooses the blue bowl. Later that afternoon, another message arrives. This time it's voicemail. I play it with the volume low, like the words might poison the air. My mother's voice is syrupy, deliberate. I didn't think you'd go this far. People are starting to talk. This isn't just about us anymore. Do you really want Jonah growing up like this? My father follows up with his own message. His voice is sharper, colder. If you want to burn the whole family down, fine, but don't expect us to just sit here and take it. I delete the messages, but they echo anyway. That night, I check the locks twice. I close every blind in the house. I stand at Jonah's bedroom door longer than I should, watching him breathe, wondering if I'm keeping him safe or just trading one kind of fear for another. I want to believe this will pass, that telling the truth is enough, but every instinct in my body is on high alert now. Every shadow feels like a threat. Every creak in the floor makes my heart spike, because deep down I know they're not done. They're not the kind of people who let go, not of image, not of control. The next morning, I find a photo in the mailbox. No note, no explanation. It's me, Jonah, and my mother at some family event 3 years ago. A birthday party, maybe. Jonah's in her arms, smiling. I'm next to them, laughing at something I don't remember. We look happy. We look like a family. But that picture is a lie. I remember that day. I remember how my mother scolded me for Jonah's messy clothes. How she told me I'd never learn to discipline properly if I kept giving in to his feelings. I remember how I smiled through it because I didn't want to ruin the cake. They think this photo will soften me, that it'll remind me of something worth saving, but it just makes me feel hollow. I show it to Jonah. He squints at it, confused. Is that me? Yeah, that's you. You look smaller. I was. He looks closer. You look sad. I was learning, I say quietly. He stares for another moment, then sets the photo face down on the table. We don't talk about it again. That night, he wakes up crying. He hasn't done that in a long time. I go to him and find him sitting upright, clutching his blanket, shaking. What happened? I dreamed I was hungry and no one noticed. My chest cracks open. You weren't there, he adds. I pull him into my arms and hold him as tightly as I can, not because I'm trying to fix it. I know I can't, but because maybe this time he won't have to cry alone. When he falls asleep again, I sit there in the dark, staring at the ceiling, and ask myself something I haven't dared to yet. Am I making it worse? Is telling the truth doing more damage than hiding it ever did? But I know the answer. Deep down, I always have. Hiding is what let it happen. Silence is what fed them. So I stop wondering and start preparing. I scan the letters, save the voicemails. Photograph the envelope, the handwriting, the postmarks. I start keeping a journal, every date, every interaction, every detail. Not because I plan to go to court, not yet, but because I need a record. I need to hold on to the truth tightly enough that I don't forget it. That I don't let them twist it back into a story that suits them better. Because if I don't write it down, they will. And I've seen what their version looks like. I tell myself I'm not scared of them, but that's a lie. I'm scared of the part of me that still wants their approval. I'm scared of what this is doing to Jonah. I'm scared that one day, when he's grown, he'll ask me why I didn't try harder to keep the family together. And I won't know how to explain that some families aren't meant to be kept. They're meant to be survived. This story isn't finished. The next move is coming, and I can feel it in my bones. The idea comes to me late at night when the world is quiet but my head is. I'm sitting at the kitchen table, scrolling through old voicemails, rereading notes I've taken, each word tightening like a fist in my chest. I'm not looking for proof anymore. I already have it. I'm looking for courage. And then I remember something my mother said to me once, years ago, while polishing the good china for her charity club. Image is everything. If we don't look put together, we're nothing. She said it with a straight face, like it was a fact of nature, like gravity, like rain. And just like that, I know exactly where to strike, not with anger, with sunlight. They built their lives around a curated image. The good neighbors, the doting grandparents, the God-fearing couple with a flawless lawn and an open-door policy. But none of that can survive the truth, especially not when the truth wears a name tag. I reach out to someone who always saw through them, Mrs. Brenner, my fourth-grade teacher. She was the kind of woman who called things what they were, even when they were ugly. Once told me in private, your parents care more about looking generous than being kind. She hasn't changed. When I call her and tell her everything, not with rage, not with exaggeration, just plainly, she goes silent for a long time. Then she says, that makes sense. And I'm sorry. I ask her if she's planning to go to the annual fundraiser my parents host every summer. The one in their backyard with the red and white tent, the photo ops, the grilled corn, the mayor shaking hands. She's never missed one. This year, she says, I wouldn't miss it for the world. 2 weeks later, the event arrives. I don't go, but my words do. I RSVP under Mrs. Brenner's name and tell her what to expect. My parents, of course, are in full showtime mode. My father stands behind the grill, tongs in hand, flipping burgers like he's running for office. My mother floats from guest to guest, offering lemonade with that smile she only wears for public use. The yard is manicured, the house gleams, the roses bloom in neat rows like nothing bad has ever happened here. And then Mrs. Brenner arrives, wearing a plain white t-shirt with black block letters, family feeds even when it's hard. My mother's smile stutters for the first time. So sorry I didn't bring my grandson, Mrs. Brenner says, loud enough for the people behind her to hear. I figured kids weren't welcome unless they're real family. Isn't that still the rule in this house? The silence that follows is the kind you only hear when people are realizing they've believed a lie. My mother's hand tightens on the lemonade pitcher. My father laughs awkwardly and mutters something about how Mrs. Brenner's always been a firecracker. But she's not alone. A neighbor leans in casually during the mayor's welcome speech. Funny, she says. You throw a charity cookout for strangers but couldn't even feed your own grandson. The words float like smoke. People start whispering. Eyes start shifting. And for the first time, my parents can't control the narrative. Not here. Not anymore. Their faces falter. They keep moving, pretending nothing's wrong, but something's unraveling behind their eyes. The crowd starts to thin. The conversations grow clipped. There's no outburst, no confrontation, just exposure. Just the slow collapse of a world built on silence. And I didn't have to destroy them. I just stopped covering for them. That night, I get a message from Melissa. No emojis, no exclamation points, just 5 words. What did you do today? I stare at the screen for a long time before replying. I told the truth. 3 days later, my father calls. He doesn't yell this time. He's not even angry. He's afraid. Why are you turning people against us? We're your parents. No, I say, you were Melissa's parents. You made that choice a long time ago. He breathes into the phone like he's trying to find the right line, the one that used to work. But there's nothing left to play. No more cards to pull. I hang up before he can speak again. Then my mother calls. She's crying this time. Real tears, but not for Jonah, not for me, for herself. I made a mistake, she says. I didn't think it would spread. I didn't think people would stop inviting us. That's when I know she's not sorry for what she did. She's sorry people finally saw it. She's mourning the version of herself that the world no longer buys. And still, I feel something twist in my chest. Not pity, just the echo of what used to be hope. The hope that they might change, that maybe if they heard enough, they'd finally see us clearly. But that hope is gone now. Dead and buried in the backyard between the antique roses and the broken promises. I have one final thing to do, one last goodbye they'll never forget. I gather old family photos. The curated ones, the posed ones, the lies in frames. And I cut them carefully, removing their faces, removing their hands, cropping until it's just Jonah and me, laughing, living, surviving. I print new versions, clean, high quality, full color. I place them in a box. On top, I write a note. This is your family now, in pictures only. Look at them as long as you want because that's the closest you'll ever get again. You fed your pride more than you fed my child. You called him a visitor. Now you're the strangers. I ship the box without a return address. Melissa calls a week later. I went over there, she says quietly. The curtains are always drawn. The grass is overgrown. They barely speak. Good, I say. Maybe now they understand how it feels. She tries to defend them again softly. They were raised differently. So was I say, but I don't starve children and call it discipline. She doesn't respond. We never talk about it again. Jonah starts smiling more. He laughs louder. His questions return curious, wide-eyed, wild. One evening he asks if we can drive past their house. I look at him for a moment. Why? I just want to see it, so we go. We don't get out. We park across the street. The porch light flickers. The roses are dying. A single curtain shifts. No one comes out. Jonah stares for a while, then leans his head against my shoulder. I'm not hungry anymore, he whispers. I kiss the top of his head. I know, baby. Neither am I. You expect a moment of peace after the storm. You think there'll be some kind of soft music, some cinematic silence where everything feels resolved. But it doesn't work like that. The silence after the explosion is just quiet. Real life doesn't cue a soundtrack when you win a war, it just keeps going. There are dishes to wash, bills to pay, bedtime routines to fall back into. And in between those small domestic moments, grief shows up. Not the loud kind. The quiet, shapeless kind that creeps in while you're folding laundry or brushing your teeth. It doesn't cry, it just sits there. Heavy, familiar, waiting. Because I didn't just lose parents, I lost the idea of them, and that's harder to bury. Sometimes I still dream about that house. Not the real version, the fantasy one, with warm light in the windows and voices calling from the kitchen. The house where I'm loved fully, where Jonah is welcomed without terms, where no one is measuring our worth against some impossible standard. I wake up from those dreams with my chest aching, but not with regret, just reality. This is what healing really looks like. It's not always strength. Sometimes it's making pancakes on a Tuesday morning and not flinching when Jonah asks for extra syrup. Sometimes it's walking past a family at the park and feeling nothing, not envy, not bitterness, just nothing. Sometimes it's telling your story for the 100th time and not choking on it. Sometimes it's sitting in the silence and realizing you're not afraid of it anymore. Because I lived most of my life in a silence that punished. Now I live in a silence I chose, one that holds room for truth, for softness, for growth. Jonah asks fewer questions these days, but sometimes they still come. Mom, do all grandmas stop loving you if you don't listen? No, baby, good ones don't. Will I ever see them again? Maybe, but only if you want to. And only if it's safe. He nods like he understands, but I know there's a part of him still trying to figure it out. I don't rush him, answers don't heal, time does, and love, the real kind. Not the performative, guilt-laced, approval-based version I grew up with, but the steady kind. The kind that cooks dinner even when you're tired. The kind that apologizes when it snaps. The kind that shows up again tomorrow. That's what I give him, and some days I give it to myself too. A few weeks ago, I got a letter from my mother. Handwritten, not dramatic, not scolding, just 4 words. Do you miss us? I stared at it for a long time. I didn't write back because the answer is complicated. I miss the version of them I used to imagine. I miss the idea that maybe they could have been better, but I don't miss being afraid to speak. I don't miss walking on eggshells just to keep peace. I don't miss watching my son shrink himself in the presence of people who couldn't even offer him a plate of food. That's the thing about endings. You don't always slam the door. Sometimes you just stop walking toward it. Jonah's laughter has changed. It's louder now, less cautious. He builds things with his hands, asks wild, ridiculous questions like, do clouds ever get tired? Or what would happen if a tree fell up? He tells jokes that don't make sense and then laughs at his own punchlines. He hugs me without waiting for permission. He's not healing perfectly, but he's healing honestly. And I think that's more important. We take new photos now, not posed, not curated, just us, messy, imperfect, real. One day he flips through one of them and says, "You look really happy in this one." I smile and say I was. He leans his head on my arm. I like it when you're not scared. Me too, baby, me too. This is the part they never show in movies, after the shouting, after the exposure, after the dust settles. This is the rebuilding. It's quiet, it's unglamorous. But it's real. You learn how to live without the people who raised you. You learn that family is not a blood contract. It's a decision you make over and over, even on the hard days. Especially on the hard days. I made my choice. Not out of anger, but out of love. Love for my son, love for myself. And maybe in a strange, impossible way, even love for them. The kind of love that refuses to let them keep hurting us. That ends the cycle by stepping away from it. That says, no more, not here, not with me, not with him. This story began in silence. It ends in a voice. Mine, yours, ours. If this story reminded you of something buried deep in your past, or gave you words you never had